Thank you. Good afternoon. The Senate Committee on Natural Resources will now come to order. Members and presenters, please remember to mute your microphone when you are not speaking. At this time, will our secretary go ahead and please proceed to call the roll.
Senator Brooks,
Here.
Senator Goycochea,
Here.
Senator Hansen,
Here.
Senator
Excuse
Scheibel,
me, here.
Senator Scheibel,
Here.
Chair Donate.
And I am here. Thank you. We have gone ahead and reached quorum. Welcome everyone to the Senate Committee on Natural Resources. Now, for anyone who has not participated in these virtual legislative meetings yet, I will quickly explain how virtual committee meetings are being conducted for the 2021 legislative session. As you know, the legislative building is currently closed to the public, so all committee meetings will be held virtually, meaning that committee members, staff, and everyone else will participate either through Zoom video conference or by telephone. However, there are various ways that members of the public can engage with us and participate throughout this entire process. As in previous sessions, all committee-related information is available on the Nevada Electronic Legislative Information System, commonly referred to as NELIS, which can be accessible from the legislature's website. There are 4 ways that you can engage with our committee. This includes registering to participate for a committee meeting through the system on NELIS, which places you in line to testify on a bill or provide public comment during the meeting, submitting written testimony to the committee's email address, sharing your opinion via the legislature's opinion application on NELIS, or viewing committee meetings online through NELIS or on the legislature's YouTube channel. To testify on a bill or provide public comment during the 2021 legislative session, members of the public must first register for the meeting that you would like to participate in. Committee meetings are listed in several places on NELIS. To register, simply click on the participate button near the meeting date and time, then go ahead and fill out the required information for your bill. Once your registration is submitted, you will see a confirmation screen and you will receive an email and a phone number and a meeting ID to call at the time of the meeting. Just as a note that while meeting registration is required to participate, it does not guarantee you a spot to speak today. Similar to previous sessions, testimony and public comment may be limited due to time constraints. When you are on the phone line, please pay attention to the directions that will be provided by PPS so you know which keys to press to raise your hand and unmute yourself. PPS staff will call on you by the last 3 digits of your phone number. And if you ever need any help, detailed instructions for participating in committee meetings are also available on the help page, which is listed on the banner of the top of every page on NELIS. You can always feel free to reach out to us and my committee members via the committee's agendas, and always feel free to contact the committee manager at the committee email listed on the agenda. Today, the committee will be receiving 1 presentation and 1 hearing on 1 measure. Presentation on the history and status of wild horse and burro populations in Nevada. Starting with the presentation with Rebecca Stetson, chairwoman of the Coalition for Healthy Nevada Lands, Wildlife, and Free Roaming Horses. Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Donate. Today, Dr. Swanson is going to be controlling slides for me. So, Dr. Swanson, whenever you're ready, I am. Okay. Rebecca Stetson, for the record. Honorable Chairman Donate and members of the Natural Resources Committee, thank you for gifting me some of your valuable time and attention for my presentation this afternoon. I'm an ecosystem health consultant by trade, as well as the chairman of the Coalition for Healthy Nevada Lands, Wildlife, and Free Roaming Horses. I am here today to spread awareness in regards to the history of free roaming horses and burros and the debilitating impact that they have on Nevada's lands when not properly managed. This matter is really near and dear to my heart, and my hope is that after this presentation, it is of greater importance to you also. I am a native Nevadan, and I grew up riding horses through the wild places of northern Nevada, and the relationship that I had with my horse, whose name was Lollipop, is still one of the most in-depth and kindred friendships that I have ever had. Between the ages of 12 and 17, I was allowed to ride miles out of sight of civilization, gone all day, just my horse and me. It was these years of exploring that gave me a deep love for horses and that made me a lifelong lover and protector of the land, the water, and all of its critters. In my early 30s, I started to notice a lot more horses on the land, and they didn't always look healthy. It was then that I started to get really curious as to what was going on and how I could help. So I think that we can all agree that we want to see healthy horses running free on our beautiful open ranges in Nevada. That symbol of freedom is under serious threat, as evident in this first slide. This picture may come as a shock to some of you who are used to seeing fat and happy horses that live at the urban wildland interface, like the Virginia range of horses that are seen between Reno and Carson City. These horses, which are fed much and frequently by humans, are not necessarily representative of the horses across the state of Nevada. In the last 12 months, emergency gathers were carried out in Nevada in response to horses that were dying of dehydration and or starving to death, an extremely slow and painful way to meet your demise. Many horse advocates consider BLM's roundups inhumane, and a death by starvation and dehydration where we do nothing, to me, is the most inhumane death horses and burros could face. These animals are part of a huge web of life, which means that more than just horses and burros are suffering. Our delicate ecosystems are diminishing quickly. Water, flora, and wildlife are all being negatively impacted. Water sources, which are always minimal on our public lands, are being decimated by a drying climate, wildfires, and unchecked growth of horse and burro herds. The BLM has mandated to manage horses to AML, or appropriate management level, which is defined as what is necessary to preserve and maintain a thriving natural ecological balance. Dr. Swanson, will you push to slide 2? This slide shows the vast amount of horses in Nevada compared to the rest of our neighboring states. In fact, we nearly have 60% of all the free-roaming horses and burros in the United States. These HMAs, or herd management areas, are not limited to areas close to cities, but they extend to the wild and roughest parts of Nevada, and making it so that management techniques cannot be a one-size-fits-all. As you can see, the green areas are both horses and burros. The yellow areas are burros, where you see a lot more down towards Las Vegas, and then the purple are horses. And as you can see, Nevada has a ton of those animals. Before we really get into the thick of this complex issue, we would like to acknowledge that livestock grazing has measurable impacts on Nevada's land health. We have a full shed of tools for ways to accomplish successful livestock management to reduce negative impacts of domesticated livestock on the land. In contrast, free-roaming horses and burros remain on the range all 12 months of every year, and there are only a couple of tools to mitigate their damage to the land. We are responsible for free-roaming horses and burros from their birth until their death. We're responsible for the destruction they may cause to water, riparian areas, loss of native grasses and other plants, and we're responsible to ensure that they are not starving or dying of thirst, which is what's happening in parts of Nevada and made BLM emergency gathers a top priority over the last year. We're responsible for the accident and injury that may come from these horses and burros being in the urban wildland interface, and their overpopulation impacts public health and safety in county where these animals regularly wander onto roadways and other public right-of-ways. Through my 20s and into my early 30s, I lived in Lyon County, very close to Highway 50. Almost monthly, there was a vehicle horse accident close to my home, almost always being fatal to the horse and frequently causing the loss of one of my community members. According to the Nevada Department of Transportation, in 2017 through 2019, there were 240 horse-related vehicle accidents in Nevada. Let's get into the history. Sherm, can you switch to slide 3? Thank you. It should be noted at the outset that wild horses are not native to North America. The last true wild horses went extinct after the Pleistocene epoch at least 7,500 years ago. The horses of today were brought to America by the Europeans. Velma Johnson, known as Wild Horse Annie, and Dawn Lappin were the strong women who effectively saved free-roaming wild horses from the demise of their time. Their main objective was to get free-roaming wild horses recognized as an element of the Western public lands and to ensure their humane treatment. Prior to the passage of the Wild and Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act, wild horses had no standing and were unprotected, just like coyotes and jackrabbits are today. They could be captured by any means, and they could be shot, sold for unrestricted private use, and Mustangers would sometimes use inhumane methods of capture, including chasing them with ground vehicles, airplanes, and running horses almost to death. So Wild Horse Annie particularly wanted to stop such activity and to give horses humane protection. In the late 60s and 70s, there were not many wild horses in Nevada. I don't believe that Annie ever envisioned the extreme number of horses that occupy Nevada rangelands today. What she wanted was humane treatment that would lead to healthy horses on the land, and that is not what we have today. Public Law 92-195, titled the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act of 1971, was enacted by Congress in 1971, largely due to the dedicated efforts of Wild Horse Annie. The Coalition for Healthy Nevada Lands considers the act to be well crafted with carefully considered provisions to ensure success and to preclude the very situation that we are confronted with today. Horse numbers significantly exceeding the carrying capacity of Nevada rangelands. There are some key provisions of the act that I'd like to speak to. The first being policy of Congress that wild free roaming horses and burros shall be protected from capture, branding, harassment, or death, and they're to be considered in the areas where presently found as an integral part, and that was presently found in 1971, as an integral part of the natural system of the public lands. 2, the act applies to public lands managed by the BLM and U.S. Forest Service. 3, the Secretaries of Interior and Agriculture must manage wild horse and burros in a manner to preserve and maintain a thriving natural ecological balance and multiple use relationship on public lands. 4, when the Secretary determines that it is necessary to remove excess animals, that person shall do so immediately to maintain the appropriate management level, or AML. 5, all management activities shall be carried out in consultation with state wildlife agencies to protect the natural ecological balance of all wildlife species, particularly endangered wildlife. The Wild Horse and Burro Act was the result of years of collaborative work by many people who desired a sustainable program to be successful over time with necessary management funding, management tools, and direction to maintain a thriving natural ecological balance. It passed the U.S. Senate 98-0. While the program was initially successful, it unraveled over time as management became entangled in politics, lawsuits, and a long lull while new humane tools were discovered and vetted. During this lull in management, exponential growth of the wild horse and burro population spiraled out of control. This alarming situation motivated the Path Forward and other coalitions seeking a solution to prevent potentially dire consequences to horses and their habitats. That has helped motivate Congress and the BLM's report to Congress, an analysis of achieving a sustainable wild horse and burro program, which was published in 2020. This report seeks a solution that works across interests, and we are thankful for this report and know that more needs to be done faster. Expeditious action backed by enough funding from Congress must be taken now to ensure the future welfare of Nevada's wildlife, lands, and free-roaming horses and burros. In closing, I ask for each one of you to support SJR3 and in doing so, advocate for a multifaceted and expedient approach to managing these beautiful creatures. Thank you for your time and attention. I would love to hear any comments you may have and answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stetson, for that presentation. At this time, do I have any questions from any of the committee members for the presentation specifically? Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Chair Donate. Hi, Rebecca. Nice to see you again. I served on public lands. I felt kind of bad because because you're new to the issue, I probably didn't give you the credit that you frankly deserve. My concern, and I'll express it to the committee and to you as well, while this is a very, very important issue to those of us here in Nevada, we're actually witnessing the damage that's occurring. I mean, those you don't know, I spent a tremendous amount of time in the backcountry of the state, have for most of my life. And it's heartbreaking to see the changes in our plant communities and stuff. And equally heartbreaking is to literally see, and I've seen it, horses starve to death. And then have to come to a meeting like this and have people accuse me of being the inhumane person because I suggest they need to be rounded up and managed properly. Rebecca, the question I have is this. When this goes back to Congress, okay, I'm sure we'll pass it here. What I've seen consistently is because the Congress is made up of people, especially a substantial number east of the Mississippi River, there is an enormous number of people back there who have a highly romanticized image of the wild horse here in Nevada and make it very clear to their congressmen that they absolutely 100% object to any changes in policy when it comes to the public domain. And I know we've sent stuff back previously, and the reality is that the Congress, because of those political pressures, have pretty much deliberately ignored this issue and done nothing to change it. What is your hope, perhaps? I'm trying not to bring on the parade here. What do you think has changed that will push this thing forward? You mentioned the Humane Society of the United States, and now they're behind it because we're going to use non-lethal methods. What is your hope, and have you done any polling or anything like that of the members of Congress on this specific issue?
So we have not done any specific polling on members of Congress, but there is a larger coalition called Freeze. And so we have this large coalition that we're affiliated with. And then we also have a variety of horse advocacy organizations that we're also in collaboration with. And you're right, we're geared up for one hell of a campaign. And that's really what it's going to take, an education campaign. And as sad as it may be, throughout my short life, I've seen that with serious issues like this, it takes things like horses dying of thirst and starving to death before people are willing to shift what they're willing to do. And we're at that place. And so it's very bittersweet. You know, I don't like to see it, but I don't know that we would ever be able to get change any other way.
Well, I salute you for your efforts. I fully support this measure. And, if there's anything I can do, I would love to be involved too, to try to get this problem solved. The real irony, especially Chair Donate, since I'm sure you're somewhat new to this, all we're really asking the United States Congress to do is obey their own law. These numbers are already in federal law. And that's the irony here. We're simply asking Congress to follow their own law. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hansen, for that comment. And just for clarification, we're entertaining questions right now just for the presentation, and then we'll move on to the bill hearing on Senate Joint Resolution 3. Do we have any last-minute questions on the content of the presentation before we move forward? Senator Goycochea.
Yes, thank you, Chair Donati, and Senator Hansen kind of spiked this comment more than anything. In the existing law, there is a provision for euthanasia. So we need to understand this is an alternative, because if we don't reach another alternative, the federal agencies will ultimately be faced with taxed with doing what the law says, and that does allow for euthanasia. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Goycochea. Do we have any other questions before we move to the joint resolution? Okay, I don't see none, so let's go ahead and keep moving forward. So I will go ahead and open the hearing on SJR 3. This measure urges Congress to provide funding to reduce the wild horse and burro populations to appropriate management levels. I believe it's an honor to introduce our next speaker, former Senator David Parks, who will represent the Legislative Committee on Public Lands to introduce the measure. So please proceed, Senator Parks, and welcome back to the legislature.
Thank you, Chair Donati and members of the committee. For the record, I am David Parks. I served as chair of the Legislative Committee on Public Lands last interim. It's nice to be with you again to present Senate Joint Resolution 3, which urges Congress to provide funding to reduce wild horse and burro populations to appropriate management levels. Throughout the interim, the Public Lands Committee received testimony regarding overpopulation of wild horses and burros on public lands in Nevada. According to the testimony provided, the Wild and Free Roaming Horses and Burro Act of 1971 authorizes federal agencies to remove excess wild horses and burros from the range to sustain the health and productivity of public lands. However, the committee learned that horse populations in herd management areas are on average 3 times the appropriate management level. At the public lands meeting held on September 10th, the Coalition for Healthy Nevada Lands, Wildlife, and Free Roaming Horses shared with the committee how horses are adversely impacting ecosystem forage, habitat, health, and water resources. The committee was also presented with the BLM's 2020 report to Congress seeking short-term funding for immediate effectiveness and longer-term funding to successfully reduce excess horses and burros to appropriate management levels. The report submitted by the BLM to Congress outlines strategies for achieving healthy and sustainable populations of wild horses and burros on public lands. At the time the report was drafted, more than 88,000 wild horses and burros were estimated to be roaming BLM-managed public rangelands, the highest levels since receiving federal protection 50 years ago in 1971. Overpopulated herds are damaging grazing lands, sensitive water sources, and wildlife habitat, and these issues are expected to worsen as the population continues to grow. The primary features of the BLM's plan include non-lethal methods to reduce population through gathers and fertility control treatments. Given the size of the current population and expected growth rates, it will take a sustained investment from Congress to implement a strategy that will be effective at achieving appropriate management levels within a time frame consistent with congressional direction and protecting range and herd health. The rise in program costs are primarily attributed to three factors. Number one, inflation. Number two, holding additional animals in off-range facilities. And number three, efforts to implement fertility control. By doing nothing, the BLM estimates that wild horse and burro populations on just BLM-managed public lands could reach 2.8 million by 2040. However, well before reaching this level, the population levels would likely become unsustainable. Based on this information and testimony provided by the coalition, the committee voted unanimously to draft a resolution calling on the United States Congress to provide funding to successfully reduce the number of free-roaming wild horses and burros to appropriate management levels using non-lethal means within 6 years to protect and restore the health and viability of public lands in Nevada. Mr. Chair, that concludes my prepared remarks. With your permission, I would now like to turn the presentation over to members of the Coalition for Healthy Nevada Lands, Wildlife, and Free-Roaming Horses to provide further testimony on Resolution SJR 3. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the privilege of your time in consideration of this resolution.
Thank you, Senator Parks. Next, let's go ahead and have Sherman Swanson, PhD, Rangeland and Riparian Ecology and Management Professor Emeritus of the University of Nevada, Reno, and Jim Settinger, PhD, Wildlife Ecology Professor Emeritus from the University of Nevada, Reno. So please proceed when you are both ready.
Thank you, Chairman Donate and the Natural Resources Committee for enabling us to have this important discussion today in support of SJR 3. For the record, I am Dr. Sherman Swanson, UNR Emeritus Professor of Rangeland Ecology and Riparian Ecology and Management, and a member of the Coalition for Healthy Nevada Lands, Wildlife, and Free-Roaming Horses. With that, I'll share my screen. And you've already seen this slide, but I'm going to leave it up for a bit because, as we emphasize, we don't need to change policy, we simply need to implement policy. As we transition from the history into the current situation that provided the basis and need for the resolution, I will speak from a perspective that I developed as the range and later the riparian extension specialist for the University of Nevada over a 36-year career. Before my career, the Wild and Free-Roaming Horse and Burro Act had been augmented by the Federal Lands Policy and Management Act and the Public Rangelands Improvement Act, which provided additional tools for gathering wild horses, which is essential for management, and adopting out the excess horses. The standards for humane treatment had been well established. Throughout my career, there have been many issues to discuss and many discussions about wild horses and rangeland management on public lands. The subject was important enough in 1990 that we devoted the entire program to wild horse management of our Nevada section meeting of the Society for Range Management. Free-roaming horse management was also often an issue 10 years later when I served as the academic representative to the BLM Resource Advisory Committee. I remember all three RACs agreeing that the standard for rangeland health should apply to horses and burros as well as to other grazing management. Throughout my career, the subject of rangeland monitoring has been a recurring theme, with all three editions of the Nevada Rangeland Monitoring Handbook. I am proud to say that all three were discussed thoroughly to achieve consensus by all key state and federal agencies and interests. Agreement was important to us, even as we learned to focus on sustaining the scarce and critically important creeks, springs, and other riparian areas that most wildlife need and that most land users cherish. I guess I wasn't sharing my screen after all. Sorry about that. By 2007, rangeland managers had learned to use monitoring as the basis for appropriate management level. With a high and a low level, this enables gathers to occur just often enough to keep horses from impairing habitats and ecosystems while maintaining sufficient numbers to sustain herds. Nationally, and almost in Nevada, we had finally gotten to the high end of AML. We adopted out over 7,000 horses that year. Then came the Great Recession. With economic challenges, too few could afford the extra burden of adoption for private horse care. That has shown us what happens when we take our eyes off the ball. Horses multiply. We have long talked of exponential growth with consistent doublings of horse numbers and in the near absence of effective predation. And we now can see where that leads. The take-home lesson is that populations need management. Without consistent and effective management, populations get to 4 times AML with only 2 doublings. The next doubling would be truly ominous. Fortunately, we have also learned in recent years that non-reproducing herds can be maintained very humanely in private off-range pastures. Their numbers slowly decline as horses live out their lives. But now we have too many horses in the wrong places. When too many horses graze and trample throughout the year or throughout the growing season, plants die, and water drains away as if in a pipe. As water drains away, the green zones shrink. Our Nevada habitats, especially those riparian green zones critical to wildlife, horses, and all of us, can lose their ability to grow the plants that maintain the sponge holding water from infrequent precipitation. Riparian areas are resilient until they lose their ability to hold water. Most rangeland plant communities are resilient until they lose their soil or lose the perennial plants that hold soil in place and that grow back to life in spring. None of us want the downward spiral of diminishing habitats. All of us want a thriving natural ecological balance and multiple use relationships. Thank you for your time. For additional focus on wildlife and the resolution, Dr. Jim Sedinger is a colleague from UNR with deep knowledge of wildlife ecology.
Thank you, Sharon. Switch to the next slide. I'm Jim Sedinger. I'm a foundation professor emeritus of the University of Nevada, Reno, with specialization in wildlife ecology, for the record. Thank you, Chairman Donate and other members of the Natural Resources Committee for hearing our comments on SJR 3. You know your time is extremely valuable, and so I really appreciate your attention today. I have 2 tasks. First, to talk about the impacts of wild horses and burros on Nevada's native wildlife, And second, to very briefly summarize our request to you as contained in SJR 3. The figure you see here shows the biomass equivalents of wild horses and burros, the orange or brown bars, versus Nevada's native big game, the blue bars. We're not showing this figure to claim that increases in horses and burros are directly causing a decline in native wildlife. We don't have the science to support such a claim statewide, although I'll discuss in just a minute the scientific evidence for negative impact of horses on several species of native wildlife. This figure is intended to raise the question of rebalancing our priorities with respect to conservation and management of our wild places in Nevada. It shows that the biomass of horses and burros currently is nearly 3 times that of our native big game species. And I want to emphasize that this does not include the dozens of other wildlife species that depend on our wildlands. If horses and burros were brought back into balance with the habitats they occupy, as indicated by the green line here, which is the appropriate management level for Nevada and was intended by the original act, the biomass of native big game would be nearly twice that of horses and burros. And we suggest that bringing horses and burros back to AML would represent a proper balancing of our priorities with respect to horses, burros, and wildlife. To put this in a societal perspective for Nevada, a 2011 survey found that more than 600,000 Nevadans participated in wildlife-related activity, ranging from simply viewing to hunting or fishing, and they spent more than $1 billion on these activities. As Dr. Swanson just discussed, free-roaming horses have considerable negative impact on riparian areas in Nevada. These areas represent less than 5%, and some estimates are as low as 1% of the landscape. But they're critical for the maintenance of wildlife populations in Nevada because they are the areas providing the nutritious food for young animals during their growth period. Numerous studies cited in our fact sheet demonstrate that horses and burros prevent native wildlife from getting access to these resources or reduce their access because horses are socially dominant to native wildlife. Additionally, horses and burros substantially degrade riparian areas, as Dr. Swanson showed, so that even when native wildlife can approach, there's less food and water available to them. And of course, this latter problem also has negative impacts on the horses and burros themselves. 17 years of work on sage-grouse in Nevada by myself and my students, every single chick, and there were hundreds of them that we monitored that survived, was using a riparian area or a higher elevation non-shrub community that provided green vegetation during the dry summer. So these green areas are critical to sage-grouse. Without them, the population simply disappear. Additionally, horses deplete key forage plants for sage-grouse chicks, and survival of sage-grouse chicks declines rapidly as horse numbers increase. Recently, Dr. Pete Coates of the U.S. Geological Survey gave a presentation to the Nevada Sagebrush Ecosystem Council in which he showed that in areas where horses were at or below AML, sage-grouse were stable or increasing. In areas where horses were above AML, sage-grouse declined. And this work indicates that AML is a meaningful management goal for the maintenance of ecological balance in thriving rangelands. Next slide, Sherm, please. Our resolution asks for 2 related outcomes. First, increased support for the resources the Bureau of Land Management needs to effectively manage wild horses and burros. And second, a rapid return of horse and burro populations in nature to numbers identified as appropriate management levels, or AML. Getting numbers down to AML as quickly as possible also benefits the horses themselves because fewer animals need to be handled, and it increases the food and water for the animals left on the range, which improves the health of wild horses in addition to the benefits for wildlife. There's an urgent need to act because horse numbers increase at 15 to 20% per year left unmanaged, which means that a 1-year delay adds 15 to 20,000 horses to wild populations at our current levels. Even at the levels we have today, BLM needs to remove more horses each year than they ever have in any single year in the past to bring numbers down. So even with no more horses added to the range, we are asking BLM to annually do something they've never done before. and the situation will be worse if we delay. Horse and burro numbers are rapidly approaching a level where we will not be able to manage them except through ecological catastrophe, which will negatively affect all native wildlife, residents of Nevada, and the horses and burros themselves. We therefore urge passage of SJR 3 in support of BLM's efforts to bring horse and burro numbers down as rapidly as is feasible, which would restore wild horse and burro populations to the levels intended by Congress when the act was originally passed. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure we'd be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Dr. Swanson and Dr. Sedinger, for that presentation, and also to Senator Brooks. Let's go ahead and see if there are any questions from the committee members at this time. Let's go first with Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Chair Donati. Actually, and Dr. Sedinger, your slide with the comparisons between the horses and the big game, I assume that's based on a weighted average, right? I mean, that obviously the population of deer alone in Nevada are about 90,000 at the moment. So I assume that's a weighted average. The reason I bring that up is when I look at your chart, one thing that I found kind of fascinating, one thing about Dr. Coates, he did some extensive studies, obviously, on sage grouse, and he was the one that kind of documented the fact that because of anthropomorphic food sources, you had an artificially high population of ravens, which were then impacting sage grouse populations. One thing I'm wondering if you guys have observed, and I've actually seen this, mountain lion populations are substantially higher wherever I found large burro populations. In fact, I've found mountain lions in areas that nobody would think was mountain lion habitat, and they were literally living off burros. And I know there was a case back in, it's been a decade or more ago, where BLM went in and rounded up, I think it was about 1,400 horses in the Goldfield area. And then just shortly after that on Stonewall Mountain, where they had a really substantial bighorn sheep population, the population basically disappeared. And what I think happened was the mountain lions that were actually living on the horse and burro population, when their food supply was literally rounded up all at once, shifted over to Stonewall Mountain and tried to live off of the bighorn sheep and consequently wiped that population out. Have you guys actually done any studies on the relationships of perhaps artificially expanded predation numbers based on kind of almost an anthropomorphically provided food source like horses and burros?
We haven't actually done that kind of work. We've also seen raven issues with respect to sage grouse that you referred to in central Nevada as well, associated with colonizing a transmission line. But I would say, some work that was done here or at Reno by a student, graduate student about a decade ago, where she had collars on lions, found that lions, a small proportion did kill horses, but they tended to be, I can't remember how many she had, let's say 25 with radio collars. Most of those were females. She had one large male that was a horse killer out of that group. So that's pretty limited data, but it does suggest that lions probably aren't going to be a solution to the horse issue. Now, wolves are invading Nevada. That's a whole other thing, right?
well, Doctor, I don't want to get up. I want to obviously focus on the bill. And I wasn't suggesting that potentially mountain lions could be a solution to the problem. I do think there's a difference, though. Horses tend to be substantially larger than burros. And I have noticed mountain lions definitely are very aggressive with burro populations.
Yeah.
But I was more interested in kind of, as I noticed your chart was going up with the horse numbers, the wildlife populations were going down. And one of the factors of wildlife populations, as you know, is predation. And if you had an artificially high population created essentially by feeding off of a population of animals that are not native to the state, you actually can have them also impacting the wildlife. Just a theory. Anyway, thank you for your presentation. Chairman Donate, thank you. And I'm 100% on board with this whole concept. We've got to get something done. Nevada is literally being destroyed right before our eyes.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Any other questions from any of the committee members at this time? I don't think I see none. Okay.
Chairman DeMonte, this is Dr. Swanson here. Regarding burrows, one of the fortunate aspects of wild burrow management is that burrows are quite adoptable. There seems to be a fairly large demand for them, I believe, particularly in the southeast of the United States. Fortunately, also, young wild horses are quite adoptable. And as our coalition has discussed, we believe that we could adopt out all of the excess wild horses if we were at AML and therefore had a smaller reproducing herd, and if the horses that we attempted to adopt out were the young, 4 years and younger.
Thank you, Dr. Swanson, for that clarification. Senator Hansen, do you have a question?
Actually, I have a question for Sherman. Sherman, nice to see you again. Question on that. With the burro populations in particular, I'm glad to hear that you think if we get 4 years and under, don't we currently have a backlog of something like 50,000 wild horses in some giant pastures in, where is it, Nebraska or somewhere? I mean, is it really feasible to adopt out the existing horses that are already captured out in addition to the surplus populations that will be harvested ideally by the Bureau of Land Management?
Yeah, that was not what I was claiming. Most of those horses that are on private pastures, mostly in the Midwest, are older than the demand calls for. And so those horses may not be adoptable. Fortunately, as they live out their lives, that number will decline. What we're proposing is that we add substantially to it very quickly and then stop adding to those off-range holding pastures. Once we get to AML, we don't believe we'll need to add to those anymore. But right now, we've got just far too many horses, and many of those are old enough to be unadoptable, and there's such a large supply, they wouldn't all be adoptable anyway. But once we get to AML, that all changes and we can have a sustainable program again.
Very good. I hope we get there. Thank you, Dr. Swanson. Thank you, Chair Donate.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Any other last minute questions before we proceed to testimony? Okay, I don't see any, so let's go ahead and proceed. Before we go to the phone lines to continue testimony, I would like to mention that we received a few letters and emails for SJR3, and some of them are already uploaded to Nellis along with today's presentations. Many of people have already shared their opinions on the legislature's opinion poll online, and I just want to share that I appreciate all the feedback that we've received from all sides. The data right now, as it stands, is that the opinion poll results is 277 people for this bill and 361 against. We received 6 telephone calls in support and 0 against, and then 19 letters in support and 36 letters against this legislation. So as a reminder, we will be limiting all testifiers to 2 minutes each. For transparency and fairness, support, opposition, and neutral testimony will be capped after 30 minutes each. Testifiers are encouraged to summarize their positions and submit more comprehensive testimony in writing. And just be aware that I will cut you off if you go off beyond the 2-minute mark. So please, if you can, stick to that mark. And if the same talking points that you're repeating after someone else, it's always okay to say ditto and share that opinion. So DPS, is there anyone on the line wishing to provide support testimony for SJR3?
Thank you so much, Chair. To testify in support on Senate Joint Resolution 3, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 349. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
For the record, my name is Doug Busselman, D-O-U-G-B-U-S-S-E-L-M-A-N. I'm the Executive Vice President of Nevada Farm Bureau. We are testifying today in support of SJR 3. Farm Bureau was a participant in the working group of diverse interests who are mentioned in the whereas regarding the 2019 collaborative agreement called the Path Forward for Management of BLM's Wild Horses and Burros. We greatly appreciate the initiative for those in Nevada who have brought this resolution forward for the Nevada Legislature to go on record in encouraging the U.S. Congress to provide the necessary funding to bring wild horses and burros to appropriate management levels within the existing herd management areas. Our state's rangelands and multiple uses which are connected to our federally managed lands cannot continue to be mismanaged by the neglect of having wild horse and burros at population levels that far exceed appropriate management levels and carrying capacity of the land. Congress needs to act by providing the necessary funding, short-term and into the future, to remove excess horses and burros from the land while providing the off-range facilities with the capacity to house the horses and burros that have been removed to reach appropriate management levels on herd management areas. Thank you for this opportunity to share our perspective.
Caller with the last three digits of 600. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Larry Johnson, Johnsson, and Senator Donati and members of the Senate Natural Resource Committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify in favor of this very important resolution. The 1971 Act and subsequent amendments mandate BLM and the U.S. Forest Service to maintain an ecological balance with all other uses. It mandates removal of excess horses. We simply ask BLM and the U.S. Forest Service to follow the law. Unfortunately, each appropriation bill through Congress limits the agency's ability to do their lawful duty. A multiple of scientific range management studies have shown that excess wild horse populations adversely impact both range conditions and wildlife populations. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Sheldon Environmental Impact Statement alone documents over 75 of these scientific studies. Wild horses should not be managed as a priority species as they presently are to the detriment of all other uses. Excess wild horses damage the range to the detriment of the horse themselves. No one wants to see starving animals of any kind, and that does happen. Wild horses are large, strong, dominant animals that simply outcompete native wildlife for both forage and water. In drought years like the last few, it's common to see wild horse bands monopolize springs, keeping wildlife from drinking and actually chasing wildlife away. Wild horse advocates falsely state that wild horse populations will regulate themselves. And actually, by the time wild horses begin dying of starvation, the range is so depleted that wildlife populations are severely depleted or gone. Now, everyone loves to see wild horses on our range. They're beautiful and a valuable resource, but like any other resource, require management, or all other users of our public land, including the wild horse itself, will suffer. Thank you for your consideration.
Caller with the last three digits of 929. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Colby Prout, Colby Prout. I'm the Natural Resources Manager for the Nevada Association of Counties. NACO's members are all 17 of Nevada's counties. NACO offers this testimony in support of SJR 3 and would like to thank the Coalition for Healthy Nevada Lands for bringing this resolution forward. In October 2019, NACO took formal action and endorsed the path forward for management of America's wild horses and burros. This plan was the result of collaboration of over a dozen diverse stakeholders, including the Eureka County Board of Commissioners, the Humane Society, and the ASPCA. NACO has shared their support of the plan with each member of the Nevada's congressional and senatorial delegations. The path forward substantially informs the BLM's 2020 report to Congress for management of wild horses and burros, and therefore NACO strongly supports SJR 3, which urges sufficient and sustained funding for implementing this plan. Nevada is home to at least 50% of the nation's wild horses and burros, with an estimated 51,000 horses and burros on the lands of our state. This is well above BLM's owned Determined Appropriate Management Levels, or AML, which is the maximum number of horses consistent with maintaining a thriving ecological balance as mandated by the Wild Horse and Burro Act of 1971. As Nevada enters another drought cycle, the effects of population over AML on Nevada's sensitive ecosystems, sensitive species such as sage grouse, and the horses and burros themselves will be even more pronounced and intense. And an overpopulation of horses also impacts public health and safety in counties where horses regularly wander onto roadways and other public right-of-ways. According to NDOT, 240 horse-related vehicle accidents occurred from 2017 to 2019, with at least 45 human injuries. With that, we'd like to thank you again, members of the committee and chair, for your time, and we urge your support of this resolution.
Caller with the last three digits of 323. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Committee. My name is Steve Walker, S-T-E-V-E-W-A-L-K-E-R. I am representing Eureka County. Eureka County supports SJR 3 as it promotes and endorses efforts to obtain and manage wild horse and burro herds at the appropriate management level, AML, including supporting the diverse stakeholder developed path forward for management of BLM's wild horses and burros and the federal funding to reach AML while avoiding unconditional sale and lethal management. In the past, the Eureka Board of County Commissioners requested BLM give full suite of tools authorized in the Wild and Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act of 1971 as amended. Our local plans and policies call for implementing the Wild and Free Roaming Horses and Burro Act as amended. However, the Eureka County Board of Commissioners fully and firmly understands the path forward for the management of BLM wild horses and burros and has formally and unanimously voted at least 3 separate occasions to support the proposal. The board chairman, Dr. J.J. Gogachia, actually testified in a U.S. Senate committee hearing on the behalf of Eureka County supporting the path forward. While we have policies stating support of full implementation of the Act, we have strong biases towards solutions that bring horse levels to conducive to rangeland health without using unconditional sale and lethal management. We will always support management options which bring excess herds to AML in a timely way while avoiding unconditional sale and lethal management. The path forward for the management of BLM's wild horse and burros is the only proposal we've seen that takes this approach and actually models the ability to reach AML. Nevada rangelands continue to take more than its fair share of adverse impacts of wild horse and burro populations, numbers that far exceed what the resource can sustain for healthy horses and working rangelands. We cannot continue the path we're on. It is imperative that something be done now to conserve and restore the health of the rangelands negatively affected by excess horses. Funding and implementation of Path Forward is the right thing to do to help address these issues. Please support SJR 3.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 075. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. My name is Dr. J.J. Goicoechea, 2 J's, Goicoechea, and I'm the current chairman of the Nevada State Sagebrush Ecosystem Council. Mr. Chair and members of the Senate Natural Resource Committee, thank you for allowing us to testify in favor of SJR 3 this afternoon. The Sagebrush Ecosystem Council is a legislatively authorized body that oversees the sagebrush ecosystem program in the state of Nevada. It is comprised of 9 governor-appointed members representing local government, wildlife, agriculture, conservation and environment, general public, tribal nations, energy, mining, ranching, and also 6 ex officio members, including Department of Wildlife, BLM, the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, NRCS, and the Nevada Department of Agriculture. The program is housed within the Department of Natural Resource and Conservation, and per NRS 232162, the Council shall consider the best science available in its determinations regarding and conservation of the greater sage-grouse and sagebrush ecosystems in this state. And the Council shall establish and carry out strategies for the conservation of greater sage-grouse and sagebrush ecosystems in this state. As you've already heard, wild horses and feral horses are having a significant negative impact on fragile ecosystems, not only across the West, but especially here in Nevada, where we now have over half of the nation's on-range population with well over 50,000 wild horses. Species that rely heavily on healthy riparian areas are seeing a tremendous negative impact due to the overuse of these areas. Dr. Pete Coates of the USGS has provided the Council with data showing a direct correlation between over-AML horse populations and a decline in sage-grouse numbers. This data is supported by land health monitoring that shows declining and often irreversibly impacted ecosystem health due to overuse by wild horses in some areas. The Nevada State Plan for the Conservation of Greater Sage-Grouse, which was created, adopted, and is amended and maintained by the SEC, Sagebrush Ecosystem Council, has a section for wild horse and burrow management, and that section in part reads that 4.1 goal, support, promote, and facilitate full implementation of the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act of 1971 as amended, including to preserve and maintain a thriving natural ecological balance and multiple use relationship without alteration of its implementation by consequent Congresses or presidential administration. Recognizing that if action is not taken until herd health has become an issue, the range and water resources are likely to be in a highly degraded and potentially irreversible state. Non-active management, i.e. let nature take its course, wait until horse health or resource conditions are critical, is not acceptable management. Non-management will negatively impact or potentially create irreversible habitat impacts within the service area, end quote. The SEC applauds the Interim Committee on Public Lands for this resolution, and at a meeting on March 16th of this year, did unanimously vote to support SJR 3 after a presentation was made by council members representing conservation in the environment and the general public. We thank you for your consideration of this matter and stand ready to assist in any way we can. The path forward is truly a collaborative effort that was the work of years of discussions and often contentious meetings. An endorsement by the Nevada Legislature will send a strong message to our partners in Washington, D.C. that we need to aggressively manage the West wild horse populations, and we will not further allow our fragile ecosystems to be irreversibly damaged due to the mismanagement of wild horses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 434. Please press star 6 now to unmute. Thank you, caller with the last 3 digits, 434. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Dorothy Nylen, DOROTHYNYLEN. I'm disappointed that none of the presenters today represent long-term wild horse advocacy groups that have been active in Nevada for a great length of time. Also, that none are considering the effects of climate change, but focus on wild horses as scapegoats for range problems. Wild horse advocacy groups as a whole do not support a lack of management. And let's see, I'm on the board of directors with Wild Horse Preservation League out of Dayton, Nevada. And I would like to call people's attention to the website wildhorsepl.org, which is with the Wild Horse Preservation League, that addresses some of these things. There just needs to be a more equitable approach to this whole situation. So far today, everything is extremely one-sided and not at all clear. And thank you for listening.
Caller with the last three digits, 548. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Rory Lamp. That's RORYLAMP. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'm a volunteer member of the Sierra Club's Toyabe Chapter Executive Committee, and I'm a retired wildlife biologist. I worked with the Nevada Department of Wildlife for 37 years. On behalf of the Sierra Club and our more than 4,000 members and supporters statewide, I speak in support of SJR 3. Inadequate management of wild and free roaming horses and burros in Nevada is causing long-term damage to our public land. The present path for managing wild horses and burros is unsustainable ecologically and economically. The lack of adequate management is allowing for uncontrolled population growth, which is causing and will continue to cause significant impacts to the health of Nevada's public lands. This negatively impacts our wildlife, the horses and burros themselves, and livestock use on these lands. And last but not least, all of the other multiple groups that use public lands in Nevada. It can only be corrected at the federal level by adequately funding and management efforts in Nevada. We are in support of maintaining horse and burro populations at sustainable levels, somewhere near or below appropriate management levels. Horses and burros are part of the multiple use fabric of our public lands, and we all enjoy seeing them. At the same time, we do not wish to witness the continued destruction of our public lands that the current excess horse and burro populations are causing. For these reasons, we urge you to support SJR 3.
Caller with the last three digits of 046. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Martin Paris, MartinParis. Chairman and members of the committee, again, this is Martin Paris. I'm the executive director of the Nevada Cattlemen's Association. I won't get too deep in the weeds as the presentations given earlier and the whereas section of SJR 3 have done a really good job of summarizing the issue. With that said, politics, limited funding, lack of long-term holding, and the fact that wild horses and burro populations double in size every 3 to 5 years has led to Nevada's herd management areas being on average 300% over appropriate management levels. This has created a dire situation for both the health of Nevada's rangelands as well as the health and well-being of wild horses and burros. The current population of wild horses and burros in Nevada is just not sustainable. Unlike cattle or other livestock, horses and burros cannot be intensively managed out on the range. They cannot be moved to another area temporarily to provide rest. They have no rotational grazing systems. Their grazing timing and seasons of use cannot be changed. Horses and burros are out on our landscapes 24/7, 365 days of a year. The fact that they are out on the range year-round is a major factor taken into consideration when the appropriate management levels are established, and is why keeping populations at those levels is so critical. An increase in funding is needed to implement a removal strategy of excess wild horses and burros, followed by an aggressive fertility control management strategy, as well as finding long-term holding solutions for those animals that are removed. We manage wildlife and even cats and dogs to some extent. Wild horses and burros cannot be the exception. With that said, the Nevada Cattlemen's Association strongly encourages the passage of Senate Joint Resolution number 3 and would appreciate any support that this committee and the state legislature can provide in urging Congress to uphold the intent of the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. Time is of the essence. The longer the can is kicked down the road, the harder and more costly it becomes to address the problem. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
As a reminder, we are currently on support testimony on Senate Joint Resolution 3. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in support, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 940. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, committee and chairman. My name is Janine Hansen. I'm the state president of Nevada of the Independent American Party. It's JANINEHANSEN. I have been involved in the wild horse issue seemingly all my life. My brother Dan Hansen, who was the founder of the Independent American Party, worked on these issues in the 1970s. Please support SJR 3, urging Congress to provide money to reduce the wild horse and burro populations to appropriate management levels. Wild horse and burro populations are 300% above the levels where they should be, with 50,000 of them on the land. This harms the habitat for wildlife, livestock, vegetation, and harms wild horses and burros themselves. It harms our ranchers, an important industry whose grazing rights are limited because of the extreme overpopulation of wild horses. It harms our limited water resources. My friend and rancher Cliff Gardner from Ruby Valley in Elko County sent me this statement. Ranchers in southeast Elko County attest to the fact that even though no sheep or cattle have been grazed in certain areas for more than 20 years now, wild horses have so ravaged the range, white sage flats have now been lost, that shad scale no longer exists, while black sage is grazed down to mere nubbins. They are destroying the natural resources of our state, and which certainly harms all wildlife. SJR 3 is a very reasonable and necessary request. Nevadans, our wildlife and livestock should not be harmed because the feds won't do their job. Even the wild horses and burros are suffering because the feds won't do their job to manage them appropriately according to the law. Please support SJR 3, and thank you very much for your time.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 732. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Kyle Davis. That's KYLEDAVIS. And I appear today on behalf of the Nevada Conservation League. We are here in support of this resolution, and we appreciate the Public Lands Committee bringing the resolution forward for the legislature's consideration. This is not a new issue, as you've heard from many of the previous commenters and the presentation that you heard. The fact is, unchecked populations of feral horses in Nevada are causing big impacts to our environment. They're causing problems with native ecosystems. They're causing problems for our wildlife, and they're in places where they are overpopulated. They're ruining the scenic vistas that we all love so much about Nevada. Something needs to be done, and we think that the solution that is outlined in this resolution is a potential path forward that might actually get us past some of the problems that we have run into in dealing with this issue since the Wild Horse and Burro Act was passed. We urge the committee support of this resolution to send that message to our nation's capital that this is an issue that needs to be dealt with for the health of our environment in Nevada. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits of 108. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Lydia Perry, Lydia Peri, and I appreciate you allowing me to speak today in support of SJR 3. Although I serve on several prominent wildlife conservation organizations here in Nevada, I'd like to speak for myself today. I thought of writing out a long testimony and having facts, but I think we've had fantastic presentations today that really bring light to the issue that we see here on our rangeland. And instead, I'd really like to speak from the heart about my experiences. I spend a lot of time out in the backcountry of Nevada, and I see horses every single time I go out. And the reality is a lot of these horses are afraid of humans. They run as soon as they see us, and it truly is horrifying to see these horses in certain areas that have degraded health conditions. And I personally don't like seeing that, and I think the majority of us don't enjoy seeing these horses suffer in these areas. I just would urge you to support this and offer guidance to us as we move forward. I think one thing that's incredibly crucial of this is you're seeing so many different groups that may have different opinions on several different subject matters, but we're coming together for a common cause. We all want horses on the landscape, but we want a healthy landscape and we want healthy populations. So I think it's nice to hear all these different testimonies and us all come together. So I urge you to support this, and if we move forward, also urge you to help us on Capitol Hill if we get there. Thank you.
As a reminder, we are currently on support testimony on Senate Joint Resolution 3. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in support, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 200, please press star 6 now to unmute your microphone. Caller with the last three digits, 200, please press star 6 now to unmute. As a reminder, we are currently on support testimony on Senate Joint Resolution 3. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in support, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I believe we were reaching the 30-minute mark, so we ended perfectly. Let's go ahead and move to hear testimony in opposition. Again, I will cap it at 30 minutes, and please keep your remarks at the 2-minute mark. Thank you.
Chair, I apologize for this brief interruption, but there was one caller who would like to testify in support that weighed in right after we said no more callers. Would you like to hear their testimony?
Sure.
Thank you so much, Chair. Caller with the last three digits, 880. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is William Molini, William Molini. I am a member of the Coalition for Healthy Nevada Lands, but I also represent the Nevada Waterfowl Association, of which I am president. I'm retired now, but I formerly worked for the Department of Wildlife for 30 years. I was a field biologist for the department in 1968 through 1972, and I can affirm that there were only a very few horses on our rangelands at that time, and that was essentially before the act was enacted and implemented.
I never had the opportunity to meet Wild Horse Annie, but I worked very closely with Dawn Lappin, who was an associate of Wild Horse Annie and who carried on her work after Annie's death. And as our chair, Rebecca Stetson, said earlier, their main goal was to get horses recognized and to ensure that they had humane treatment. I am positive from my work with them that they had really no goal of having the tremendous number of wild horses on our rangelands that we have today. I want to make a point about that we are very supportive in our coalition of the BLM, and we believe that the BLM knows what needs to be done, and they know how to do it. They just need the financial and political support to accomplish the goal of reaching AML. Wild horses have demonstrated the ability to double their populations every 4 to 5 years, so that by 2025, Nevada could have 100,000 wild horses on its rangelands. Such numbers will put rangeland-dependent wildlife at peril. Not only will wildlife suffer catastrophic declines, but the land resource will be so badly injured that its ability to produce and sustain water, vegetation, and wildlife resources may be altered to the extent that recovery potential is lost for generations. Finally, we recognize that this is a resolution to Congress and that Congress must act in order to reach the goal of getting horse and burro populations to AML. However, this resolution clearly sets the position of the state of Nevada about addressing this of utmost importance to the land resources. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And BPS, I believe that concludes testimony and support. So let's go ahead and move to opposition to SJR 3.
Thank you so much, Chair. I appreciate that. To testify in opposition on Senate Joint Resolution 3, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 200, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Mary Cioffi. That's C-I-O-F as in Frank, F-I. And I'm president of the Pine Nut Wild Horse Advocates of the Carson Valley. Our residents locally love these historic bands that have roamed in our area, as long as local memories can recall. We consider ourselves a logical group, the Pine Nut Wild Horse Advocates. For many years now, we've worked together with our local district office of the BLM to provide humane birth control to the bands in the hills to the east of our town. We have reduced the reproduction rate by 81% in 2020, and this year promises to be even more successful. None of our wild mares appear to be in full on the Fish Springs Range this year. Our horses have wintered well and are in excellent health. We are suggesting that wild horses can be managed in the wild successfully on many ranges with good results at a much lower cost or at no cost to the taxpayers. Wild horses are not the negative impact solely responsible for the condition of our public lands. We also need to consider the effect of off-road vehicles on our range. This bill does not reflect the opinion of the vast majority of Nevadans, and most certainly not in our county, to remove any of our local horses. We're disappointed we're not given an opportunity to testify before you today as those supporting this bill, and we'll hope you will postpone a decision on this until you've heard opinions from both sides. We would be happy to meet with you soon. It appears that others are testifying to you that the only alternative to roundups and removal is to do nothing at all. There are many other options, and they are being implemented now. It could be on a greater scale. These wild horses provide tourism to Nevada, and on our range, we've given tours from people all over the world and all over our country. They stay in our hotels, shop in our stores, and dine in our restaurants. Our community strongly supports leaving the wild horses on the range they were born on. We as a community are willing to manage our horses on our range. We're willing to do the labor and fund the cost of birth control. We are a local group, and we do not want to see a one-size-fits-all rationale program intended to remove starving wild horses or horses with no water for humane reasons to be blanketed across Nevada and used to remove our fish springs horses. Our horses are not dying of thirst or starving, and our range has never had any restoration after numerous fires over decades. We do not support this bill across the lands of Nevada, and certainly not in the Carson Valley. We again hope you will postpone your decision until we have an opportunity to meet with you and you can hear both sides of this issue. We need decisions to be based on sound science, not the potential for profits. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits of 910. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 910. You may begin your testimony now. We'll move to the next caller. Caller with the last three digits of 754. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Carlo Luri, Carloluri, and I would like to read a brief statement by Christopher and Camille Bentley, owners of the Bentley Ranch and the Bentley Heritage Estate Distillery, in opposition of SJR3. And the statement follows: this is a clear case of throwing good money after bad. Science has provided a better solution, a more humane, more effective solution that does not spend millions in taxpayer dollars. Are we going to ignore it just for the sake of making the same mistake over and over? The BLM's roundup and holding facilities expenses skyrocket. A science-based solution is being ignored. The PZP program being carried out by the American Wild Horse Campaign and their partners offers a real long-term solution. All that's required is collaboration between the BLM and the volunteers. We need our legislators to be willing to embrace the solutions of today instead of clinging to yesterday's mistakes. And I'll add some personal thoughts on that. We've heard a lot of testimony from rangeland experts. We consider ourselves environmentalists and we care about the health of the range. We're not opposed to population management of the horses, but we are concerned that this bill is too narrowly focused on removing the horses from the range. I personally have been to the holding facilities, and according to the BLM, the cost of feeding a horse is $5,000 a year. Typical, a horse might be in captivity for 10 years. That's $50,000 per horse. Multiply that by 50,000 horses in captivity, and you can see how the numbers add up pretty quickly. The old paradigm is to remove horses and put them in holding. Why do that when the populations can be controlled by effective birth control, which will solve the problem at a much lower cost to the taxpayers? Thank you very much.
Caller with the last three digits, 489. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Denise Bolbol. It's B-O-L-B-O-L. I'm the Vice President of the Gardnerville-based Pine Nut Wild Horse Advocates. This committee has heard one-sided presentations today on SJR3. We urge this committee to please postpone voting on SJR3 until the committee receives presentations with data from the other side of this issue. Without having presentations from both sides of the issue, you're basing your decision on biased, one-sided information. There's no way we can address all the issues raised in a 2-minute public comment period. The basis, though, of SJR3 is the BLM's appropriate management level system. But please, listen to what An independent and non-biased scientific assessment of AML says the National Academies of Sciences, our country's premier independent scientific research body, has played a significant role to ensure the U.S. government is provided balanced, fact-based information and data. The BLM paid the NAS to conduct a review of its wild horse program. This is what the NAS stated in its report. The committee could, quote, the committee could not identify a science-based rationale used by the BLM to allocate forage and habitat resources to various uses. Another quote, AML is not supported by scientific information. The NAS also said there is no scientific information that supports AML. The NAS stated that AMLs must be adapted or changed to reflect, quote, changes in societal values and public attitudes and preferences. The NAS highlighted that forage allocated on BLM land, wild horses account for just 5% of consumption, while livestock grazing accounts for 95% of consumption. We ask that you put off the vote on SJR 3. Please let the committee hear the other perspectives and data on this issue that outline why SJR 3 is wrong. I'd just like to note 80% of the forage BLM allocates in the congressionally designated wild horse habitat or herd management areas is given to livestock, 80%. This is what AML is based on, giving wild horses just 20% of the forage in their own congressionally designated habitat. It's widely known that livestock is responsible for widespread destruction of rangelands, riparian areas, and is also a leading cause of global warming due to methane. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
BPS, before we proceed, I just want to make one clarification, and that is this committee will not be taking any action on SJR 3. Right now, we're just listening to the testimony. That's the same that has been applied to our other bills. So, BPS, we can go ahead and continue.
Thank you so much, Chair. Caller with the last three digits, 094. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Okay, my name is Craig Downer, CraigDowner. I'm a wildlife ecologist, and I'm a multi-generation descendant of pioneers here in Nevada. Horses mean a lot to me. I grew up on a horse, and I wrote a book called The Wild Horse Conspiracy. I also got my master's degree here at University of Nevada, and worked was a friend of Wild Horse Annie and Don Lappin. I just feel there's a terrible slanting of the information, and that the wild horses and burros are being scapegoated or blamed for so much that is wrong in this state, but that they use the wild horse and burros as convenient red herrings or distractors to the root cause of the problem. I really resent the prejudiced views against these wonderful animals. They are deeply rooted North American natives, and they, if they're not put into into a very compromised position by management decisions that just don't give them their fair share or don't positively recognize their niche in the ecosystem here, then naturally they tend to be miserable and starving because that was the intention of their enemies. And I do not agree with PZP. I believe that this is a violation of the core intent of the act, and it's rendering them into domesticated animals. However, I do recognize that when they have mature social units, they're able to self-stabilize their population, and I'm an advocate of what's called reserve design. where you contain an area, viable habitat, and you allow the horses with their mature social units to fill their niche. And there are various ways of keeping them in those commensurate viable populations, among which are adverse conditioning, which doesn't have to be very harsh, and positive reinforcement. And the horses and burros are very intelligent, and they will learn, and they're highly advanced beings, and we owe them great respect.
Caller with the last three digits, 665. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello. My name is Randall Macero. I'm National President of Union Members for the Preservation of Wildlife. We're Teamsters and a coalition of union members throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. We've been around since 1970. We also have, we're affiliated with many Native American tribes from Canada and the United States. We're representing our brothers and sisters today within the Native American community and opposing SJR3. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to realize this is a smokescreen. It's a ruse, and we've been at this for many years. We have undercover video footage of roundups as well as the cattle ranching community. You got to understand, if you go back in history, the cattle ranching industry started the range wars. They not only went after Native Americans, but started and wanted a free range of their cattle, and they went after the sheep herders as well. They started many of the issues here in the United States. And if we use satellite imagery in a lawsuit, it'll show that cattle outnumber horses 10 to 1, if not more. But yet nobody's doing that. Why? Well, look at the BLM. It wasn't that long ago that the cattle ranchers had guns on the BLM agents. Let's expose the truth for what it is. Since 1971, they've made many movies. All you have to do is look at The Pursuit of Honor, from The Misfits to Billy Jack. Many, and myself now being retired law enforcement, working in federal law enforcement as well as state law enforcement investigations, we're willing to help the Native American community and our fellow animal rights activists with the video footage that we need to testify at the Capitol and give you that footage as well if it comes down to lawsuits. How much money does Nevada have if the Native American community, as well as the unions, our Teamsters, and animal rights advocates pull together to take on the cattle industry and the BLM, the National Park Service, the U.S. Forestry Service? This is an all-out war on our wildlife. And it's America's dirty little secret, America's other war, America's war on wildlife. I just got off the phone with the Associated Press, CNN, 60 Minutes in 2020. Being an actor in Hollywood, I'm on TV all over. But the simple fact is, as many as SAG and AFTRA actors are looking at you now, you're setting the example, and we're looking to see if you're going to do the right thing. Does Nevada have enough money to take on legal cases piling up? Simple fact is, more money is brought in by ecotourism than killing wildlife, 3-4 times as much. And even your top investigative reporter, George Knapp, said it when he made the commentary on the Safari Club International. Look at the Stampede to Oblivion video that your George Knapp, Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter, did on the BLM. So let's expose the truth. Thank you. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 399. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi.
Caller,
Judy
please
Conway.
proceed.
Judy Conway, Judy Conway. Thank you for letting me speak. Aside those of you with such august credentials, these beautiful horses often look for food and water in Silver Springs residential areas where I live, and I see them when I drive along Highway 50, where accidents do often occur. but I see lack of fences. Wouldn't more fences help solve their wandering onto the road? Why not build more fences along Highway 50 and USA Parkway? Well, we're so worried about horses dying of thirst. Why did someone allow the building development to destroy the water hole off USA Parkway and or not replace it elsewhere, or did they? Why was that water not protected under the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act? No one disputes something has to be done. Just this birth control doesn't sound like the only or best option. Please vote against this bill as it needs work and adjustment of priorities in favor of horses and as opposed to cattle and building. The roundouts and holding pens cost more in the long run than perhaps more humane and realistic scientific birth control and other solutions such as the previously mentioned NAS ideas. Thank you for letting me speak.
As a reminder, we are currently in opposition testimony on Senate Joint Resolution 3. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in opposition, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 128. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Sheila Schwadel, Sheila, Schwadel. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Sheila Schwadel. I'm with Pine Nut Wild Horse Advocates. I'd like to bring to your attention a paper published by peer.org, and that is Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. And to quote, this is, the title is Agency Grouse Review Puts Thumb on Scale to Magnify Wild Horse and Burro Effects. The method used by the U.S. Bureau of Land Management to assess range conditions is seriously skewed towards minimizing impacts from domestic livestock and magnifying those from wild horses and burros, according to an appraisal by Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, PEER. As a result, the BLM's approach to range management targets scattered wild horses while ignoring far more numerous cattle. A peer appraisal of BLM methodology found, 1, BLM calculates the area of influence of wild horses and burros on sage-grouse habitat based merely on their presence within herd management areas in sage-grouse habitat, while it considers livestock impact to have occurred only when livestock grazing allotments fail the agency land health status, that's LHS, standard for wildlife. 2, if the agency used the same approach for calculating the area of influence of livestock within BLM grazing allotments on sage-grouse habitat as it did for wild horses and burros, the area of influence for livestock would be 14 times that given in the report and more than 6 times that of wild horses and burros. And 3, within BLM's own grazing allotment LHS database records, livestock grazing is cited as a cause of failure to achieve a land health standard 30 times more often than our wild horses and burros. I would like to have the committee also focus on livestock grazing. And also, I will send this report to committee members if we can do so via PDF so they have the chance to read the full paper. It's short and sweet, but to the point. And the point is that BLM has been skewing their numbers much more heavily in favor of cattle and blaming and scapegoating our wild horse population. Thank you, and we look forward to presenting to you the other side of the issue. It's not a one-sided issue, just scapegoating our wild horses.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 381. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Stephanie McCoy, STEPHENIE, MCCOY. I run an organization in Nevada called Wild Now that we set up in about 2019 in order to be able to help some way, whatever way we can, with the wild horses. And what I'm asking of you today is just that you consider in your resolution of the problem that these horses are not protected, and there is a problem, and where that problem lies, I don't personally know. I know that there are competing interests, and I know that there are bands of horses out on the rangelands that, when removed, go to long-term holding, and my problem with this particular proposal is that I don't believe that they'll be protected in the long-term holding process. What I don't like to see is for the removal of the horses to continue to create then more horses in long-term holding. Meanwhile, the horses on the range aren't properly being managed. The PZP I believe in, I'm trained in it. American Wild Horse Campaign actually paid for my training, and I've been waiting for 2 years to be able to go and dart in an area called Fish Creek, which is where my Mustang came from. So I'm just asking that you consider all angles before making a decision. The decisions that have been made in the past for the BLM's management of these horses hasn't proven to be successful. They continue to overpopulate the rangelands because they're not doing anything to fertilize the horses, to do anything for the reproduction. So my personal Mustang came from the Carson City Correctional Facility. I've been out to Fish Creek where he was rounded up in 2015 and seen the bands of horses there. They live as families. Most of them actually look better on the range than my personal horses do here at home. So I think there's more information that could be presented to you all. I hope that you take a look at all of the angles before you just decide how to fix a problem that hasn't ever been fixed in the same way that they're proposing to fix it now. Thank you very much.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 423, please press *6 now to unmute. Caller with the last 3 digits, 423, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Deb Walker, Walker, and I am the Nevada field rep for the American Wild Horse Campaign. I have been a volunteer in the PZP darting programs since 2011. One of the observations that I have made is that just as programs begin, they are shut down for one reason or another, which then puts us behind in our fertility control projects. And I want to say that right now on the Virginia Range, we are running the world's largest wild horse fertility control program. We've darted 1,400 mares and given over 3,300 treatments as a primer and a booster. It's important to note that this is being done by volunteers and donations to American Wild Horse Campaign. Removing approximately 40,000 wild horses is going to cost the taxpayers about $40 million to capture and remove them, and up to $2 billion to maintain them in holding facilities. This is absurd, and it's taking action that is against the majority of what the Americans and Nevadans would like to see for the wild horses. The current management system is a failed one. They keep doing it over and over and over and over and over again, and it's not a solution. Fertility control is a solution. It's a viable solution. We see it working, and we just would like to ask that you would consider, like some of the others have said, hearing both sides of this matter, because the wild horses are being scapegoated, and there are other ways that we can manage population safely and humanely on the range. 86% of Nevadans want the wild horses managed.
Caller with the last three digits of 749, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Louise Martin. Most everything has been said already, so I'm probably not going to say much. I appreciate everybody supporting the wild horses of Nevada. I've lived here, well, since Kiski Lane was a dirt road anyway. But what I want to say is definitely there needs to be two sides presented. Today, the presentations were totally slanted to one side, and it needs to be equal. That's how things should work in this country. And I also just want to put this in there that 85% of Nevada residents or more support our wild horses on the range. It's a very small minority that is fighting against the wild horses being free on the range. And there are new solutions. It's time to get past the old and start with the new. There are positive solutions that can be done, and American Wild Horse Campaign is one example. And yes, there are too many cattle on the range, and they do cause a lot of damage. I'm sorry to tell you that, the cattle ranchers on this committee, but it's true. And nothing is spoken about anything but the horses, the damage the horses are doing to the range. And it's just, it was so one-sided, I was just amazed. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
As a reminder, we are on opposition testimony on Senate Joint Resolution 3. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in opposition, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 691. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Jennifer Baker. It's JenniferBaker. I'm calling in opposition because I sat in a room with the governor last session, Assemblyman Wheeler, Jeffrey Burns, and several others that decided that the most humane and proper thing that Nevada could do is the fertility control. And I heard it over and over again, and I agree that we do have population issues. But I say if we're asking to reduce the population within the next 6 years, then we focus all of our efforts on fertility control, which is the most humane thing we can do with a simple birth control dart in the tail of a horse that doesn't mess with the wildlife behaviors. And it allows, after 5 attempts or 5 actual shots, we can start looking at permanent sterilization of the female horses, which is a permanent solution to all of this overgrazing, overpopulation that we've been talking about. I don't believe that all the BLM numbers are correct. I believe they are skewed. I have lived here since I was born. I look around and I see these wild horses all over the place. And I am a big believer in doing things the right way. I ask that you all consider that there is a more humane opportunity sitting in front of us. And the AWHC was just recognized as being a world leader in fertility control, which puts Nevada on the map for doing the right thing at the right time for animals that don't have any other advocates standing up for them. You know, do the right thing for those that need you the most right now. This is a good time to do it. And I just say, if we're going to do something like this, focus our energy, our efforts, and our money in a way that will actually benefit the state of Nevada in many ways and put us on the map for doing the right thing, setting the example and treating animals humanely. Thanks for your time.
BPS, this will be I think we have one more caller on the line, so this would be the last one before we close out testimony. We've reached the 30 minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Chair. Caller with the last 3 digits of 910, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Honorable Chair and members of the committee, my name is Eric Molvar, E-R-I-K, M-O-L, V as in Victor, A-R. I am Executive Director of Western Watersheds Project, which is a nonprofit conservation group working to protect watersheds and wildlife across the American West. I'm speaking in opposition to SJ3. And first, I'd like to point out that I am a wildlife biologist, and my publications are in large ungulate interactions with vegetation and ecosystems, specifically Alaskan moose. I did my research at the Institute of Arctic Biology, where Jim Sedinger also was at the time. And I listened to Jim Sedinger's presentation earlier and talking about the biomass of wild horses exceeding the native wildlife biomass. And I didn't hear Jim Sedinger report a biomass number for cattle. Sedge, did you forget a bar in your bar chart? Because I looked at the comparison between cattle and wild horses nationwide, and I corrected for animal unit months, so we're comparing 1 month of horse use versus 1 month of cattle use, and I found that there was 14.8 times as much cattle use on Western public lands as wild horse use. So when you're talking about damage to the range or impacts to the environment, you need to remember that it is primarily the cattle and the livestock that are having these impacts on the land. When you're talking about damage to riparian areas and water holes, it's not the wild horses who are coming into water once or twice a day and then leaving for higher ground. It's the cattle that are sticking around the water, wallowing in the water all day long, that are doing the heavy damage to those fragile riparian vegetation. Now, if wild horses were the real ecological problem in the American West, Western Watersheds Project would be having them as a priority to address. Wild horses are not the problem. Livestock are the problem. Wild horses are the scapegoat. Thank you very much for receiving my testimony. And one last thing I'd like to mention. This is from a publication by Beaver and Aldrich, 2011, in the Studies in Avian Biology monograph. This is a quote: "Free-roaming horses spread rapidly across the Intermountain West, and populations reportedly peaked in the U.S. at 2 million to 7 million animals in the late 1700s to early 1800s. Now, if we have as many as 88,000 or 100,000 wild horses, and at the time that was the benchmark for native wildlife being at their peak, we had 2 million to 7 million, I'm sorry, the 100,000 or 88,000 we have today out on the range are rounding error and really can't possibly be having a major ecological impact. Thank you for receiving my testimony, and I urge you to vote no on SJR 3.
Thank you. I believe that concludes our opposition testimony. So BPS, finally, is there anyone wishing to testify in neutral on SJR 3?
Thank you so much, Chair. To testify in neutral on Senate Joint Resolution 3, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 738, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chairman Donante and members of the committee. My name is Alan Jenne. Last name is Jenne. I am the Habitat Division Administrator for Nevada Department of Wildlife. Good afternoon, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify neutral. There has been a great deal of testimony and biological expertise that has been shared with you today. So we'll keep our comments short and ask that you consider Nevada's 895 wildlife species in this resolution. Nevada's scarcest and most important resource is water and the associated riparian habitats that are relied upon by all species. The long-term degradation of these waters and vegetative communities is exacerbated by the excessive unmanaged wild horse and burro populations and has detrimental influence on other species, numbers, and distribution. With wild horse and burro numbers at 300% above prescribed management levels and the potential for populations to double every 3 to 5 years, it necessitates urgent action to maintain healthy and productive landscapes for Nevada's wildlife. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment, and the department will be available to assist if there are any follow-up questions or further support is needed. Thank you very much.
Caller with the last three digits, 211. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Jackie Chandler, Chandler. I would like to underscore the points made by the previous callers opposing the bill and note and especially underscore the fact that there was no balance of presenters for each side. So in being neutral, I'm very curious that why these other voices weren't heard, especially around reserve design, having a viable, sustainable habitat for the animals. If there's one thing that we hopefully are learning as a species in order to secure our own place on the planet with the rise of global climate change, that if we don't start giving habitat back to wildlife species, we will not survive. And I think what would be helpful is to manage greed and the encroachment that is being taken by developers, livestock, urban sprawl that is moved into their habitat. If we had, wildlife, quote unquote, move into our habitat, we certainly, as known through the last centuries, have taken steps to move them back, but we don't seem to want to give anything to the wildlife. The idea of a reserve design or viable sustainable habitat, or why isn't the BLM working actively with all these nonprofits and volunteers that are out there working to help sustain, whether it's bringing water or food, because water systems have been taken away. I have seen this myself where development moves in and then the horses are pushed to starvation and then they're blamed when the livestock is a bigger footprint. And I do appreciate the comment that the livestock was missing on the graph for an animal weight. And since these are public lands we're talking about, having them mostly taken up by the ranchers dominating 80-1 against the wildlife, it does skew the numbers. I'm also very suspicious of the count, the 80,000 count. I've also been out and I've seen the BLM management, the past and current management of the horses. It seems incredibly cruel and inhumane, and I'm suspicious of who counts 90,000 horses anyway. And why don't we count how many urban developments? I think if there's a management to be done, it's to manage our own sense of greed and inability to share habitat that has been occupied by wild horses before us. Thank you.
BPS, before we continue, I just want to give a quick reminder to everyone that this is not time to share opinions on either in support or opposition. We are on neutral right now. So please be mindful of that just for fairness and transparency. BPS, is there anyone on the line wishing to provide neutral testimony at this time?
Thank you so much, Chair. And as the Chair stated, we are currently on neutral testimony on Senate Joint Resolution 3. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in neutral, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you, BPS, for that. Senator Parks, do you have any last-minute remarks? I'd be willing to lend the floor to you.
Thank you, Chair Donati, David Parks, for the record. I do not have any comments at this time. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Senator Parks, for joining us today. It's such an honor to get the chance to meet you virtually, and I know we all value your time and your service to the state. Great. I will go ahead and now close the hearing on SJR 3. Before we move on to public comment, I want to give quick clarification to how this meeting was conducted. Like any other bills, we have the proponent of the debate present the bill, and then we move on to testimony for all sides to provide their input on the legislation on an equal basis. I want to reiterate that the committee will not be taking any action on SJR 3 today, similar to how other bills have been presented. And may be brought back for a future work session And I realize that this is a very sensitive issue for many of you throughout the state, but I want to thank you all for taking your sincere time to share your thoughts, and we will be mindful of them when we decide how to proceed with this legislation. At this time, let's go ahead and move on to public comment. I will now go ahead and call for public comment. Please remember to limit your comments to 2 minutes. VPS staff, is there anyone wishing to provide public comment?
Thank you so much, Chair. We are currently on public comment. If you have recently joined the call and would like to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working, and there are no callers for public comment at this time.
Thank you so much. Members, are there any questions before we adjourn? Or any comments or anything? It looks like we are good. So thank you all for joining us today. Our next meeting is Thursday, March 25th at 3:30 p.m. This meeting is now officially adjourned. Thank you.